Welcome to ADHD Focus, where we explore what ADHD really means, from diagnosis to real-life solutions and how to navigate it with confidence. This is your guide to understanding ADHD and living well with it. Here's your host, Dr. David Pomeroy.
Hello, this is Dr. David Pomeroy, your host of ADHD Focus, the podcast which brings you reliable, solid information about ADHD and a lot of things that go along with it. Today, I'm very happy to have as my guest Theresa Lear Levine, who will help us understand tapping, emotional freedom technique, and how it applies to anxiety and stress and all those things that are such a little part of ADD. No, not really. They're a huge part of it. You can take medication, but that doesn't solve the anxiety part. You can take anxiety medicine. It still just kind of lowers it a bit, but it doesn't get at the root cause. And my thinking about anxiety has changed. It's a condition, yes, but it's not a disorder. It's not a disease. It's a symptom. And I think this helps address that symptom. So, Theresa, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
So I'd like to talk about the stress response, which so many different things trigger, and certainly having ADHD triggers in so many ways. So the main stress response our body has when there's a perceived threat is fight, flight, faint, or freeze, a number of different ways of characterizing it, and a release of cortisol, which is our stress response hormone.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you see EFT making a difference in that sequence?
That's a good question. It makes a huge difference in it. When we tap, and I think maybe it's helpful to understand what we're doing with EFT in the first place, because some people see it and they think this is just the weirdest looking thing ever, and how does this even work? And then, of course, what you're leading to is that not only does it work, but it actually can have a huge effect on cortisol and anxiety and
it can change what's going on.
Absolutely. There's this whole chain reaction of things. So, and you're right. I don't think, anxiety is often less of a standalone problem and more of the signal that the nervous system is perceiving a threat, which is where the whole fight or flight thing comes in. And with tapping, for anybody that's not familiar with it, you're addressing whatever the problem is. Let's just say you're addressing anxiety, since that happens to be what we're talking about, or stress. And while you are talking about that and how it is affecting you, bothering you, what's going on, you are literally tapping with your fingertips on these different points on the body that are known as meridian endpoints. So basically any root of a dis-ease that we have, whether that is mental, emotional, spiritual, or physical, is going to be blocked energy. And energy tends to get blocked at these different endpoints. It's the whole principle behind acupuncture, or even deep tissue massage, where we can release these energetic blockages by applying pressure or inserting a needle or whatever else. The lovely thing is here, we don't need any needles. We're just going to use our fingertips gently to tap on these same parts and get the same sort of release. But what happens when we begin, being really specific about what the issue is with our words, and then tapping on these endpoints, is we send a signal right to the amygdala. So that little almond-shaped part of the brain that is where the fight or flight response happens.
Right. So it's the filter looking at everything that's coming along in terms of, is this dangerous or not? Kind of listens to the hippocampus, which is an area right next to it where memory, do you remember anything that's worrisome about this? Oh, yep. And There's the release of cortisol and all the signals that go through your thinking. Let's figure this out. Part of the brain, stop. And we have to get ready to fight here.
Yeah, and once
And
that
that's a
stress
problem.
response kicks in, whichever response happens to be the one that is normal for you usually, because everybody seems to have one that they favor, fight, flight, freeze, flee, fawn, whatever. I'm not a doctor and I'm not very technical. I like flop in there too.
Yeah, yeah, that works.
know, it's there's a lot of different ways we respond, but once that happens, a lot of people do notice that typical ADHD symptoms do kind of seem like they're a little bit louder when we're in that
Hmm.
state. Focus is a lot harder in that state. Our emotional regulation gets harder. Task initiation, it's always, that can be
Yeah.
hard enough anyway. And then put the fight or flight
Hmm.
in there, and it gets even harder. And then additionally, we're more reactive and avoidant and irritable and shut down. So EFT makes a difference in that it gives the body a direct signal of safety while we're, calming down the amygdala,
Hmm.
while we're acknowledging what's happening. So the body's receiving, okay, things are actually safe and okay. And then you can actually process the thing that it was thinking was a threat
Hmm.
along
Hmm.
in a feeling that's safer. So the key is that you're not using EFT to just like pretend like, okay, things are fine, calm down, whatever.
Yeah,
That doesn't work. You're actually acknowledging, even though I'm really activated right now, stressed or anxious or whatever the case may be, and even though that can be really overwhelming, um, I'm sending my nervous system a different message.
hmm, hmm,
So that's
yeah,
what's really happening is we're tapping on those points, and then we can, access the part of the brain that can prioritize and choose and be
sure.
logical and rational and plan and communicate and all of those
Hmm.
things to take the next step.
How long does it take the doing the tapping, for instance? How long between doing that and getting into it um, does it take for the cortisol to start dropping down, or say 5 minutes later, what's going on with the cortisol level?
Yeah, it happens surprisingly fast. So everybody's going to be different. And, there's a lot of scientific studies out there. I can't reiterate them very well in
Okay.
this kind of a scenario. But cortisol drops measurably after like a short session. And for some people, that might be only 5 or 10 minutes. I know
Mm-hmm.
there is one study that I always remember where it was within a session, which I believe was an hour, they noticed that the cortisol went down 43%.
Wow.
So that's really
Yeah,
significant. And
that's a lot.
yeah, I would not be surprised if it goes down that much in a much shorter period of time, depending on
Hmm.
how direct you are with addressing
Hmm.
honestly and acknowledging honestly what is happening and being very specific about what's going on. But people definitely can feel an emotional shift within
Hmm.
just a few minutes of tapping. And to me, that would, indicate that likely the cortisol is also shifting at that
Shifting
time
down.
too. But yeah, I mean, I think the most important thing for someone with ADHD is that they're noticing a change in their state. And
And pretty quickly.
that could be a change in their breathing or not wearing their shoulders as earrings or noticing
Hmm.
that,
Hmm.
their thoughts are a little bit, more put together or slowing down a little bit, not racing as much, and things don't feel quite as impossible.
So, in terms of the actual tapping, it sounds like that maybe takes 5 minutes, or let's just look at kind of the basics. We can get into the specific parts of it, but the basics is one round of tapping or one set, not necessarily a session, because that sounds more like
Yeah.
therapeutic one, but one set of tapping about one thing takes about how long?
Again, that can vary too. I think if you're super simple and you keep it really short, you're looking at, 2 or 3 minutes. If you get more detailed,
Hmm.
and I know a lot of times when I'm doing rounds with my clients, it could take more like 5 minutes or even 10 minutes to
Hmm.
really, address all of the little details and things that really help to move those
Hmm.
energy blocks. But all that to say, it can be as simple or complex as you want it to be. And either way, the results are fantastic.
Great.
So, I mean, really, it's as long as you have these kind of simple parts that make up, like you said, a
Hmm.
round of tapping, then you're good to go. So you need to make sure that you have something that sets up the round. They call that part the setup statement, which is usually kind of like I was saying before, kind of like that even though I sort of a statement, even though I feel stressed out and anxious.
Hmm.
You know, the traditional ending there would be I love, accept, and forgive myself. Because we know that when we actually get to true love, acceptance, and forgiveness with anything, then the way we feel about it has to change. But
Yes. Yeah.
everybody is ready to jump right to I love, accept, and forgive myself. So there's a lot of variations that can happen with a
Hmm.
setup phrase, but you set up the round and then you go through, and the setup normally happens either on the side of your hand, tapping there,
Hmm.
or rubbing kind of that sore spot on your chest. And then you start to go through the traditional tapping points. Different people do them in different orders. I like to start at the top of the head, tapping there, moving through the eyebrow point, the side of the eye, under the nose, under the mouth, the collarbone point, and then under the arm. Those are kind of the 9 points that have been
Hmm.
scientifically proven to overhaul anything you throw at them. So we use those points while we are just honestly sharing about what we're feeling, what's going on, what happened, what the experience
Hmm.
was that has, given us some
So
intensity of emotion.
someone could use it, and I talked to someone yesterday who just finished a job interview, said, I always have such a hard time with interviews. I never do well in them. And I'm thinking, boy, that must be really tough to go into an interview thinking I'm not going to do very well. Whereas 10 minutes before to just, I feel real anxious about doing interviews. And that's their setup phrase. And then go on through that. And maybe 5 minutes of doing that. And then they probably will have a different point of view going into the interview. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah,
and
being able to set that up, even though I'm anxious about this interview, I'm open to the idea that it could go fabulously well. Could be a
mhm,
totally different outcome
totally
for somebody. And
right.
I know a lot of times when I'm working with people that know that they have that kind of a, you know, uh, whether it's public speaking that frightens them or the
Mhm,
idea of like being questioned and not having the right answer, or sometimes it's like fear of flying, these things where we have to be in public and face these fears. I always love to
mhm,
teach people how to like do tapping discreetly. If you're in a boardroom interviewing and you get to sit down, you've got your hands under the table. You can, tap on meridian endpoints on the sides of your fingers while you're answering questions, and that can have a great calming effect. There's a lot of ways that you can sneak it
mhm.
in without feeling like you look like a weirdo doing it somewhere or needing
And
to sneak off into a bathroom in order to do some tapping.
and speaking of that, doing something under the desk with your hands, that also helps with an ADHD related thing that quite often most of us with ADHD can think more clearly and focus if some part of our body is moving. Your leg is bouncing, or you're fidgeting with something in your hand, or just fussing with your hands. But it doesn't look good to be in an interview and kind of be doing this. Whereas if under the desk you're doing something that's also productive, like the end point tapping on your fingers, then that's kind of a double benefit in there. Um, so where do you think how do you think that, what things in ADHD, what situations trigger this fight or flight response? And I know there are many, many, many different ones. Um, but let's look at some of the, I guess, more global ones. For instance, I'm just feeling anxious that, gee, I'm not keeping up. My grades aren't as good as other kids. I know I'm working really hard. I can never do things right. My parents are always after me because you forgot this, you forgot that. And you're never going to amount to anything if you don't change. And the kid's trying to figure out, I'm doing the best I can. What do I change? How do I do this? Um,
Yeah, with ADHD, um, the brain is often dealing with more perceived threat happening than
mhm,
what people can see from the outside.
mhm, quite
So
definitely.
that's higher to begin with. And, it's not physical danger. Your grades aren't physical danger or, feeling like you're
Mhm.
falling behind or whatever, but it's still getting read that way. Being late can feel like a threat or forgetting something important,
Mhm.
seeing too many notifications piling up on your device, that kind of a
Right.
thing, or even like being interrupted when you finally feel like you got your words in your mind together. You're
Yeah.
gonna like
And
lose
then,
it all over again. Like all
mhm.
of those things can trigger a fight or flight response, and they seem like just these simple everyday things that happen to everybody, but then you layer it on an ADHD brain and it's different, realizing that, oh, I dropped the ball again on something. Like that
Yeah.
can feel very threatening.
I think it's easy to compare ourselves to what we see other people doing. And gee, all the other moms got their kids to the baseball practice on time, and they all had every part of their uniform, and everything's all set, and they're real calm. We don't see the fact that that mom has worked really hard to get things together. And maybe she's figured out, okay, I have a list and I go over the list and my son goes through the list and we work together on that. And others are just scrambling and trying to figure out, okay, where's all the stuff and get everything into the bag. Um, so it can look like other people have it together, but that doesn't mean they feel comfortable about it. And they have the stress of, am I going to forget something? And all it
Yeah.
takes is one time you forget it, and then that sticks in the memory. How did you feel when you forgot that? You felt terrible. Well, I really don't want that to happen again. Bingo, the cortisol goes up, that stress of, I'm not going to look like I'm doing it right.
Right. So then we think of that as like an identity threat a lot of
Hmm.
times. Or, it's ADHD can be really emotionally loaded. And I think a
Oh, it
lot of
is
that is
all the
where we
time.
kind of start with people a lot of the times. There's a lot of that, like rejection sensitivity. And it's not just that it's like logistically inconvenient. Like
Hmm.
it's one thing to say like, okay, like I struggle with time management, which I think is just a weird thing to say anyway, because time is a human construct and it's made up anyway. And how do you manage it? And it's like, time is strange, right? And then it's
Yeah.
another thing when your nervous system actually turns that into something. Like it turns your struggle with time management into like, oh, then I'm the mom that can't get it together and get my kids places on time, or then everybody else is doing things better than I am, or my kid's going to suffer because of me. Like all of these are like ways that
Hmm.
it's just being kind of interpreted, and we're adding our own not capital T truth story to the
Yeah.
logistical piece of it. So then it becomes this identity issue, and that's a threat, right? It's a threat to the identity, and that can absolutely trigger more fight or flight, more stress hormones, more of the stuff that we don't want. So yeah, I mean, and as
And
parents
that,
with ADHD, I know it's like, oh, I forgot the permission slip, or the kids are
yeah.
running late to
Yeah.
their lesson or whatever else. Like I've done all that kind of stuff. We forgot to, wear a teacher appreciation spirit week outfit the other day. And it's like, oh, well,
Hmm.
I'm
And
not at a
that,
point where I worry about it anymore. And my kid doesn't really care either. But, it's just like, yeah, other
it,
people are figuring it out. And sometimes you just don't feel like you are. And it can feel, if you're not careful, it can feel like shame. And
oh,
then
yeah. Yeah.
that can
You
feel
want,
really dangerous.
and I think maybe I think it happens for men, but they don't talk about it as much, or maybe it's not quite as easily identified. But certainly for women, the social identity, what they're expected to live up to in terms of, yes, your kids are neat, well dressed, well behaved, your house is clean and orderly, you've got things ready, your dinner's on the table, and everything's cool. And I don't think there are too many households that happens, even with neurotypical people. And with
Right.
ADHD, I bet it just doesn't happen 100%. Everything's the
Mhm.
way one perceives society thinks it ought to be. And that's a lot of self-perception too, instead of, okay, sometimes we have pizza. And sometimes, yep, your baseball pants are still going to be a little scraped up and a little muddy from last time, but you're still
Yeah,
going to be able to play and they're still going to work. And you
absolutely.
don't have everything spotless. But that's still the kind of thing that triggers the anxiety. I'm not going to measure up, and people are going to see that.
Yeah, because we add on to it, right? Like it's not
Mhm.
just I'm late, it's I'm late, and that must mean that I'm failing or that
Yeah,
I'm going to
yeah.
be judged or that I'm not the mom I want to be or the employee or whatever it is that we're late
Hmm.
for. And so it's going to trigger things because it stops feeling like it's just some simple practical problem and it starts we make it this proof that
Make
something's wrong with us.
and then every time we get in a situation, we remember how that feeling was, and oh, here we go again. And so it builds on itself. And anxiety certainly is one of those things that you get anxious about being anxious
Right.
about messing up again or having messed up. Um, and that's where the doing something, particularly in the moment, to reduce that, I think is um, more helpful than, great, you took your pre-test medicine or you took your anxiety medicine that morning or that night, and that just kind of puts a little blanket over it, but it
Yeah.
doesn't get at the source of it. And I think that can be frustrating and lead to that overwhelmed feeling. I'm doing everything I can. I've been trying harder and harder and harder, and it's not working. Yeah,
Yeah.
try harder doesn't get there.
The stuff that I like to use in my practice as far as like EFT or hypnotherapy really helps to like separate the thing, like the task or whatever it is from the shame so that it can you can deal with the
Hmm.
actual problem instead of fighting the identity around it.
Yeah, and shame is huge. I think that's the basis of so much, particularly with ADHD, but also a number of other things. But those with ADHD not only have a sensitivity to the texture of clothes or the label on the back of the shirt or um, texture of foods, certain sounds, but also sensitivity of emotions. Those are also there. So we have an overreaction of emotions, if you will, a higher level of them. Um, and so anything that can help us reduce that instant reaction. Um, so let's go through the kind of the tapping sequence and how, say, over a um, couple minutes, someone's going to be walking into an interview, sitting down, getting ready to do a podcast, uh, and how to just calm things down so we can start from a solid foundation of I'm good enough. I'm going to do okay.
Yeah. Good enough. That's what we all want, right? To feel like we're enough. That's
Hmm.
so much of the problem. So usually if you're getting ready to start an interview, and you don't have a feeling of being like grounded or that your nervous system is regulated, then you might feel anxious. And yeah, it's so interesting because it can be shifted so easily. I'm still like I'm going back to what you just said about like the tags and shirts and stuff because I literally just cut one out like this morning as I was getting dressed because the one back here was bothering me. And there can be like so much shame around that. So, EFT is useful because we're not arguing with the reaction. So maybe you are
Mm.
getting ready to do that interview and you are anxious. We're not going to, try to go from feeling anxious to, feeling completely good enough in 5 minutes before an interview. But we can start to kind of inch you closer to that and relieve some of the things that are just
Mhm.
not true. So if you were going to use tapping before that kind of a situation, you would first want to assess how you actually feel at that point. Traditional tapping is going to have you use like a 0 to 10 scale, kind of like you would at the doctor's if you were assessing physical pain. And you might think of, hey, when I think about doing this interview, how activated do I feel? And maybe you have a more specific emotion if you're in tune with what you're feeling. How anxious do I feel? How stressed, how incompetent, how whatever do I feel? You would rate that. And then you would notice kind of where that feeling is in your body. Do you feel it like in your heart racing? Do you kind of feel sick to your stomach? Is there somewhere that you feel it? Maybe in your throat, like, I don't even know how I'm going to get the words out. There's kind of this feeling like I'm just blocked up here. And then you would do the round of tapping. Like we said before, you'd start on the side of the hand. You could say the same setup phrase 3 times if you wanted to keep it simple. Something along the lines of, right on the side of the hand,
You're doing the tapping on what you've called the karate chop.
Karate chop point. Yep, exactly. So you'd be tapping that part, and maybe you would say something along the lines of, even though part of me feels activated, getting ready for this interview, I'm open to being here as I am. And you would repeat something like that 3 times. Change it up if you feel fancy. And then you would, after that, go to the top of the head point, is where I like to go next.
Middle of the head. Okay.
Yep, kind of the crown of the head. And you would kind of start talking about how you feel. So an example might be, this pressure to get it right. And then you would move to the eyebrow point. Maybe it's this fear of messing up or not answering the question the way that I want to. And then you would move to the side of the eye, this need to sound smart. I feel like I need to sound smart. For us ADHDers, and we'd move to the under the eye. Maybe it's like, I'm going to have to mask. I don't want to have to mask.
I'm going to have to.
And because that takes a lot of energy.
I don't want to freeze because if I don't have an answer right away, that's going to be a problem. And
you're just you're moving through these points, going under the nose and just saying what you're feeling. Here it is again, this familiar feeling, getting ready to do an interview and afraid I'm going to screw it up. You're just being really honest, moving through these points, making sure that you're tapping at least 5 to 7 times in each spot as you move through, collarbone, and then move into the under the arm area. And maybe you talk about where you feel it in your body, this feeling in my stomach or this feeling in my chest, because when we talk about those things more specifically, then we can allow some of those physical symptoms to change. But you put it all out there, how you feel like you're not good enough, what you're afraid of, all of that kind of stuff, and just go through those points from the top of the head to under the arm about 3 times through. And then just take a nice deep breath and reassess where you feel like you are on that 0 to 10 scale after doing it. Ask yourself again, when I think about doing this interview, how activated am I? And, for some people, they get more activated before they get less activated. But for the majority, you're going to find you're going down. So,
and even if it was 8, okay, I'm down to 3. Well, it's not perfect. So what? You're down.
Exactly. Better than where you started.
The other thing that occurred to me is helping to relax those areas in the areas in the body where we felt tight, and oftentimes at kind of top of the shoulders and upper back where your ears get up close, get down closer to your shoulders. Your shoulders are getting up there to try to wrap around your ears. That taking that deep breath and then rolling shoulders back and rolling them forward can help emphasize that relaxation after you've done the tapping. Sure, that may be helpful if you do that alone, but that you aren't getting at the emotional block there, the things that are behind feeling tight in your shoulders.
A good deep breath and some stretching helps us all, doesn't it? And it's interesting because when the nervous system starts to relax as you shift out of fight or flight, one of the most common things that happens for people as they do EFT tapping is they yawn. And that this signifies like an energetic blockage being released. It also signifies that downshifting of the nervous system because, if you were in fight or flight, you're probably not going to feel relaxed enough to yawn. So
no, that's not a typical way to start off running away from something or hiding or
So it's always a good sign. People always apologize when I'm tapping with them, on a Zoom or, a client session or whatever. They're like, oh, sorry, I'm yawning. I'm like, an EFT practitioner is always thrilled to see you yawn all the way through a session. Like nobody will ever be
Yeah.
happy to see you yawning at them more than an EFT practitioner.
So, how does one become an EFT practitioner? What's involved in um, training in it? I just want to give people a sense that this isn't, you see someone who's an EFT practitioner and they haven't decided, well, I've done this a few times. I can see that it helps. Here, I'm going to make a sign and say, yep, this is my website. I know how to do EFT. What's involved in getting there?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different levels. There's you can be a level 1 practitioner, a level 2 practitioner, or you can become a master practitioner, which is what I chose to do. I will also say there are people out there that are practicing it that are not certified, and that's also not wrong. You do not have to be a certified practitioner in order to use the technique. So, yeah, there's various different levels, but it's going to, depending on how far you go in the certification process, then you're gonna learn how to use the basic tapping sequence. You're going to learn how to identify specific issues instead of staying too broad because EFT does favor specificity. You're going to learn how to work with emotions and memories and body sensations and limiting beliefs and how to gauge whether you're pushing someone too far too fast and how to help them with processing trauma and things like that, how to track the intensity before and after things and be trauma informed in the work, and also how to know when something is outside of your scope. So
Yeah.
all of those things are going to be part of practitioner training.
hmm And then we've talked a lot about anxiety, which certainly is one of the really common things that travels along with ADHD. How about depression? How might EFT address that, which I think of as a flight into self-criticism? It's not a anger and fighting outside. It's directed anger inside.
Yeah, depression's a little obviously different from anxiety. EFT has still, in my experience, been really helpful with it because there's often a nervous system component there too. Like with the anxiety, we've got the overactivation, the racing
hmm
thoughts, and the tension and the urgency, and then depression can be more underactivated, can be
hmm
more shut down or heavy. A lot of times we're seeing like hopelessness and lower motivation, physical fatigue, disconnection from people or activities or just life in general. So with EFT, it's not about like just think better thoughts. Depression never is. Um, and that can oftentimes make people with depression feel worse. It's more like addressing like the even though this feels heavy or even though my energy is different right now, even though I don't know how to feel better yet, those kind of things. And we can get a lot of, upward movement as far as like, this scale of consciousness kind of moving towards more,
hmm
enlightened and things from those depressed feelings. And I often see when I work with people and with depression, we have to kind of move through at some point the anger that's there because there's usually
hmm
some unaddressed anger that we need to be able to release also in that journey. But I mean, I think with anxiety, it's like EFT kind of turns down that alarm system, but with depression, it's like how do we kind of turn the lights back up a little bit? Like it's like a dimmer switch. We can
Yeah.
take it from like that really dim depression. How do we just kind of keep turning that dial a little bit to bring the
hmm
lights back on? But it's still incredibly effective with depression.
hmm Yeah, I think that a lot of people I see that have depression, whether it's around ADHD or they have depression also that's not directly related, I think they're always somewhat tied together, um, is the idea of competence. I'm not competent, and it's not so much an anxiety about the fact that I'm not competent, but just there I am. I failed again. I'm not going to be able to do this. I haven't been able to before. I'm trying hard. It's never going to work. Boy, this is hopeless. And just get into that negative self-talk cycle. So breaking that and I can see how the tapping, you're doing something physical and you have to think about the sequence and things. So that's taking away from the thinking the negative thoughts. Meanwhile, you're talking them out. This is what I'm feeling, and I don't like it, and I'm kind of dull, and I'm just not able to get going on things, and I want things to be different. And talking that through and vocalizing what's happening is a way of what one might say is thinking out loud, which is in itself processing the thought. But the movement takes you away from thinking about it the same way, rather than just sitting there and thinking, okay, I really can be better at this. I really am going to have more energy. That's probably not going to work. If it had worked, you've been able to do it already.
Like when we try to affirm a lot of things and we make too big of a jump, it kind of backfires on us. So if we're trying to go from I'm not competent to oh, I'm amazing, the nervous system and the subconscious mind are both gonna call BS on that. And and the reticular activating system is gonna bring you like all the reasons why you actually are incompetent and like it's gonna try to, like bring you all the proof. So yeah, I mean, we can also make that work for us if we rephrase and reframe the question or the statement that we're putting out there. But, if we can give that current belief a safer voice while tapping or in, trance and hypnotherapy, and recognize that like a part of me believes I'm incompetent, or I feel like I failed again, or I'm afraid this is never going to work, instead of these really definite limiting belief kind of statements, then we can release and lower the emotional charge around the belief. It's usually almost always a belief that's underneath of depression too. It gives our brain more room to consider like possibility that's available to us. So if you have, I'm not competent as the starting point, then the movement might be shifting that to something like, that doesn't mean I'm incapable. Or maybe I need to build some support that works with my brain. Or I can rebuild self-trust, just like one thing at a time, one thing that I follow through on, or whatever else. That's how we break the negative self-talk. It's not like we put a big positive, thing on top of it or whatever. We try to, some whipped cream on top and a cherry on top of something that's not good in the first place. But instead, we are releasing from the nervous system the charge around the thing that felt so shameful, so that the thing that's actually more true has a place to, get rooted and grow.
And I'm thinking here, and when someone's saying I'm not competent, well, you weren't born competent in knowing how to do anything. You weren't born knowing how to use a spoon and not have the peas fall off the spoon or even the mashed potatoes. You had to learn how to do it.
Yes.
But I doubt there's any baby who's thinking, darn, I'm never going to be able to learn this.
No.
And I'm hungry. I'm going to try to figure out how to, so that gets the coordination so that works. There's that feedback of, oh, I got 2 of those pieces stay on the spoon. At least I got something. And learning that pattern without the thinking, because a baby doesn't have that cognitive processing to be able to say, see, you're a dummy, you're not going to be able to do this. There's that drive to get it done and not the thoughts that get in the way.
Right. Because like you said, like you weren't born knowing those things. Competence is always going to be developed, right? But like you were born being enough. Like your worth has always been inherent. So, none of us are born competent. We're completely dependent, right? Can't talk, can't walk, can't regulate our emotions, can't feed ourselves, or any of that stuff. So if we're using competence as our measure of worth, then it's always going to be troublesome. Like none of us are ever going to arrive like worthy or whatever else.
Mhm.
But we do because we're born enough. And then competence becomes something that we build through repetition and support and mistakes
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
repair and learning.
And definitely, we learn from mistakes, not learn from doing it perfectly.
Yeah.
As someone asked Thomas Edison, who had tried evidently 1,000 times to come up with a light bulb that actually worked. And this person said, "How does it feel to have failed 999 times?" He said, "I didn't fail. I just learned what didn't work."
Yeah.
Uh, So your mistake is, okay, that didn't work. What can I do differently? How can I look at this a different way? Whereas the anxiety may be, oh, what if I make a mistake again? I'm not going to be able to. I remember one, I think he was 8 or 9. He had failed a test. This is in third grade. And he was, well, I'll never do well in high school and I won't be able to go to college and I'll never get a good job. And I'm saying, wait. You're going way, way out there. Let's step back to what can you do to help that um, thing you're working on come to mind when you're in the test and not worrying about you aren't going to get a good job and that anxiety spins out of
Yeah, that's a lot to take on in the third grade.
yes, exactly. And the I'm not confident I'm never going to be able to do it. And then that gets into the depression part.
Yeah.
It's hopeless. And okay, I can learn a different way. And
Hmm.
that may be the only thing that comes out of the tapping. Not that you know how to do it, not that you know how to go about it, but that you can let yourself know and feel that I can learn it. I can look at a different way of doing it.
It's
Uh,
it's almost exactly why, David, like nervous system work has been so important to me because I was always somebody that I could gather the knowledge, I could understand how to do something, why to do something, anything else, but I would still end up kind of hitting this invisible wall, which I didn't realize at the time was always my nervous system, and that's why
mm,
it's so important because when you can work with your nervous system, you can stay regulated enough to like turn a mistake into just being data instead of something about your identity. And
mhm,
that's why it becomes so important. Because, you know, we since we don't learn from doing things perfectly and we have to make mistakes and we have to go through, feedback and adjustment and all sorts of things in order to really, get good at whatever it is that we want to do.
mhm,
That only works if your nervous system can stay safe enough to process it.
mhm. So, and that's where getting out of that fight or flight, that stress response, cortisol is ready to just super energized to do something other than think about it. Because if you're trying to figure out whether that, going back to a long time ago when fight or flight is how you stayed alive, was that noise in the bush is something you were going to have for lunch or you were going to be its lunch.
Right.
And boy, you were on high alert and you weren't thinking about anything other than what do I do now? Um, and
Yeah.
then act on it. So you didn't have to think about, okay, I'm going to turn around and start running. I need to put this foot here and this foot there. Just go. Um, and when there's a thinking it through that would be helpful, I'm going to be able to do okay in this interview. I'm going to be able to answer some questions. I'm probably not going to have an answer right away. That's okay. Doesn't mean I'm bad. Doesn't mean I'm incompetent. I can demonstrate that I know this material. Um,
Yeah.
then you can think through it as opposed to what if I freeze? And gee, self-fulfilling prophecy. You freeze. So it's a
Absolutely.
way of diverting that stress response.
I remember being really anxious when I first started doing podcast interviews years ago, and I got comfortable really quickly with knowing that I could simply say, if you ask me a question and I don't know the answer, all I need to say is, you know what? I don't know the answer to that yet. I'll get back to you. And
Hmm.
like that it's okay to not know. Like that
Yeah.
we're not expected to have like it all up here all the time. And, and that's served me very well. I don't have to use it very often, but it makes me feel a lot safer to know that I don't have to have all the answers. I can just have a
Hmm.
conversation.
And I think that's one of the artificial things about tests and whether any profession where you have to think through things in a test situation. Okay, do you know this? Well, in a real life situation, boy, I've got to figure out some more about that. I'll look it up. So knowing where to look it up and what are reliable places to look, that's more important than knowing that actual data point. Unfortunately, tests are, they want to look at the data points. Um, and that's a perspective on, okay, I'm going to come up with this, or saying, that's an interesting question and a pretty complex one. I'd need some time to work that out. And I'd probably look at Google Scholar and professional papers or whatever, so that one can give an answer that says, I know where to look without feeling a pressure that I have to come up with that exact perfect answer right now.
Yeah, which is so much harder to do also if you're in fight or flight.
Mhm, exactly. So in terms of, we've talked about a kind of therapy and sessions. It sounds like the EFT has a number of levels at which you can use it. Someone could use it almost informally just before the test or before the interview. And you don't necessarily know all the ins and outs and the perfect things to say, but you can make some progress. And then there's a more structured, like a therapy, but doing and working through the process. So, how long would you usually work with a client in terms of not just a session, which may be an hour or half an hour or whatever, but how many, say, weeks or months would you work with someone? And I
Yeah,
realize that's the complexity of whatever they're bringing to it is part of that.
absolutely. And I have a bunch of different entry points as far as my work is concerned, where, like I have an accelerator program that's about 3 months long, where we can really work on like one thing that's really kind of getting in the way for
Mhm.
somebody and get some and the one thing is always a ripple effect thing that affects all sorts of things, but kind of that one core issue. And then I have longer programs where people, begin working with me knowing that we're going to be together for 5 months or 12 months, that kind of thing. And I have a lot of clients that are just very growth oriented like I am, that might finish one thing and be like, oh, I want more, I want to stay, and they'll work with me a while longer. But I would say generally
Mhm.
anywhere from 3 months to people that have been with me for years that haven't stopped yet, because we just keep finding more breakthroughs and more ways
Yeah.
that it just makes their
Mhm.
life better.
Mhm. Great. Well, Teresa, it's been great to talk with you about a technique that has a lot of application and is fairly straightforward. It's not complicated. It certainly has, I think, no negative side effects to it, other than it may take you 5 minutes to do it, or a couple months if you want to invest that kind of time and really get at what's going on. Um, and I think it can address not just the almost superficial anxiety there of a test situation, but also things that get at our core identity and how we talk about ourselves. And I know resources that are available to for people to learn about tapping in terms of how it helped change your life is in your book, which the poster right behind you, Becoming More Me, uh,
Yes.
explains. And then you have some other websites or other resources for folks. Tell us a little bit about those.
Yeah, I've got several things I can direct your listeners to that might be helpful. If you want to try tapping, I would go to the website is theprivatesessions.com, and you'll be able to get a free resource that has tapping videos in it that you can find something that applies to you, press play, and see how this actually affects you in real time, which is super cool. If you want to check out the book, I have a great resource there where you can start reading it for free by going to teresalearlevine.org/first chapter, and you can grab that. And then anywhere else, you can just find me pretty much by looking up my name. I'm Theresa Lear Levine everywhere. So whether you're on Instagram or other social media, you can find me there. And I'll give David a link for my community. I have a free community on the school platform that is a great place to dig in and start learning too. So lots of places that you can learn more and get started.
Great. And I will have those available on my website, on any of the introductions to this podcast. And one quick note, when you say the school platform, that's SKOOL.
Yes.
School,
Yep.
having just signed up to be a member of that community.
Yes.
Struck by, okay. That's a different way to help us get at the idea that this is school, but it's different school.
Yes, it's a great platform for learning. I really like having a community over there. And as an ADHDer, it doesn't have the distractions of like the Facebook groups and things that end up having advertising peppered throughout them and everything else. So I like it for my own learning and for providing for my community the resources.
Well, great. Theresa, I think you're providing for the overall community, not just in ADHD, but in so many ways. And thank you for your work. And thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate you having me. I love that we didn't reduce this to just focus on productivity and that we brought in a lot of the emotional experience today, the stress response, and went deep on that. So thanks again.
Great. This is Dr. David Pomeroy, your host of ADHD Focus, the podcast that brings you reliable information about ADHD and all the things associated with it. And I'll look forward to talking with you next time.
Thank you for listening to this edition of ADHD Focus with Dr. David Pomeroy. This show is not intended to be a recommendation for diagnosis or treatment of any condition for any specific person. Please consult your mental health professional or doctor managing your ADHD or mental health issues about any diagnosis or treatment-related information that you hear on the show. Refer your ADHD provider to this show if he or she would like more information.